My name is Andreas. I'm the lead producer on Payday 3. And Payday 3 is essentially a game about heisting with your friends. Everything from robbing jewelry stores to banks. So it's still that sort of core fantasy, and we're trying really to capture what the ultimate criminal fantasy is about. One big difference is Payday 1 and Payday 2 was developed in our in-house engine Diesel. And we moved away from that with Payday 3. So Payday 3 is being developed in Unreal 4. So as a part of the development process, one big challenge and leap for us was to rebuild the game from scratch because we didn't have Payday 2 as a foundation. So one thing that we really focused on for quite some time is making sure that our fans will feel at home, meaning we've really tried to capture what Payday is about, that moment-to-moment feel, and making sure that players will feel at home and that the DNA is still there. From a feature perspective, there's a lot of things that we've expanded upon. But generally, we're looking from the perspective of, if we have a feature, how can we make sure that it actually feeds into what the fantasy is about? Because it's a heisting game, right? So, for example, you can take hostages and civilians as human shields. You can trade hostages with the police to buy more time before they go into the building and so on. So most of the features we've done, we're really trying to enhance what the core fantasy is about. So the core gameplay is still about team play and social play, right? So that's another thing when it comes to the features. We're trying to build features from the perspective of they can be synergized between each other. So for example, we have tools in Payday 3, which is something that is new. That's stealth-oriented gameplay. And usually those are built from a co-op standpoint. So you have a micro camera, as an example, that you can place on your teammates or any NPCs, and then you can look through that camera, right? So there's a lot of synergies between all the features that we're building, and the same goes for all the different skill trees that we have. We're always trying to think from the perspective of how can this feature be enhanced if you're playing with more people? Obviously, we have a lot of solo players and we're still catering to those. So everything that you're doing can be done in solo, but we're still incentivizing players to play together. And that's how we're designing features. In Payday 2, when we launched it, we had 4 different skill trees and they had very clear roles. The problem with that from our point of view and from a community standpoint is that you don't have a lot of freedom and flexibility. So in Payday 3, we have more than 100 skills at launch, which is quite a lot, right? And those are not linear neither from a progression point of view. So you can really mix and match between the different skill trees. So that sort of allows players to really tailor their play style based on how they want to approach a heist. So at launch, we are going with 8 heists, which is a fairly similar number to what Payday 2 had. Obviously, Payday 2 today it's a huge amount of content, right? So what we really try to do with Payday 3 is making sure that all of these 8 heists, they feel very unique, both from a thematic point of view, but also every heist has this sort of unique feature that people really can identify the heist with. So for example, the branch bank that you have seen has a thermite that you're using to burn through the floor into the vault, and there's gameplay around that. In the art gallery, there's a lot of different security measurements in the different exhibition rooms. You have laser grids and motion sensors and so on. So we're always trying to identify what is unique in the heist from a thematic and from a gameplay point of view, and then we're building it from there. And that's something that we're going to continuously do post-launch as well. There is a replayability factor to the levels as well, which is something that we call security firms. So security firms are essentially a heist modifier that can be applied to the heist based on difficulty, and those rotate as well every week. So the replayability value in the levels are it's pretty deep. You can really try to, overcome obstacles and infiltrate the buildings in a lot of different ways based on the type of equipment you have, the skills you have, and so on. They can also be layered, these firms. So, like I said, we have 3 at launch, and depending on difficulty, you can have more than 1 active at the same time. So it's because Payday has a philosophy of, it's a tactical game, but it's very important for us to make sure that there is some unpredictability to it as well, because that goes so well hand in hand with heisting. Like in every heist movie you see, they always have a plan, but something happens, And that sort of moment is so important in Payday. And it goes for Loud as well. Like when you're playing in combat, usually what we're seeing when people are playing is they're pretty relaxed and they're pretty confident until they get to, let's say, the vault as an example, and they're about to extract the loot. Then something happens that really forces you to rethink how you're playing. You have to be really, really coordinated, or shit's gonna go down. But that's like, it's intentional. We wanna trigger those emotions and those moments of panic. It's a huge part of the franchise in general. We call it the heist escalation, meaning how the map escalates over time when you progress in a heist. So for example, when you make a mistake, maybe you shoot a camera or you break a glass and the guard notices that, and the map escalates into something that is called search. Like those moments when the map starts to go into a more tense situation, that usually really forces people to rethink how they're gonna progress in the heist and do their objectives, how they're gonna use their tools and so on. So when that happens, naturally we're seeing that players are like, they're getting together, oh shit, the guards are looking for us now. Maybe I should start using this tool now. And then the further it escalates, the more tense it gets. So from the perspective of how the map escalates, I think those generate the most interesting moments where people really start coordinating. And of course, the higher the difficulty, the more it requires you to really, really work together. But then, of course, there is always an interesting synergy between the different skill builds that you have as well. So, for example, in one of the combat-oriented builds, you can slide into enemies and that staggers them. And, combining that with someone who has a shotgun build or, a stun mine and stuff like that. So what I like is what we've seen when people spend time in the game is that players are finding a lot of creative solutions between different skill builds and equipment that we haven't thought about, They have their design intention, but then suddenly it's like, oh, you're combining this with that and that build to create this sort of moment and so on. And that's super interesting to me, because that's how you really see, user stories and so on. So we can't go into details yet about the actual content, but we are going to share a roadmap before we launch the game. And one of the reasons is we want to make sure that we have something that is fairly predictable, so that people can read into what's coming. One important thing is for launch, we've consciously really focused on nailing the core gameplay and what the core is about. The moment to moment, what you're doing in the heists on a micro level, making sure that we get the skills right, the equipment right, and so on. So at launch, with the 8 heists, that's just it's a small portion of the package that we're seeing ahead of us. And we're really aiming to grow not just the amount of content, meaning, cosmetics, weapons, and heists, but we're also looking into, social features and other types of features. But we also want to work together with our community. We have a good relationship with them from Payday 2. And it's very important for us to understand at launch potentially where their expectations aren't met and see how we can cater to that moving forward. So we do have crossplay and we have cross progression as well. So you can play with your friends that are, if you're a PC player, you can play with PS5 players or Xbox X and Xbox S. And there's cross progression between that as well. So if you want to switch between different platforms, you have the possibility to do that. It has a new engine. It feels more modern. It's smoother. The movement is there now. It looks better. All the features are generally deeper, and you're gonna feel more like a heister than what you're doing in Payday 2. So if you want to live out that ultimate criminal fantasy, then Payday 3 is the game. My name is Andreas. I work at Starbreeze as the lead producer of Payday 3, and you're watching Pixel TV.